All right, welcome everyone for day 4, Thursday of Earth Week. We're going to start with a prayer from Aaron. Either one, whatever one you'd like.
This might be a repeat from earlier in the week, but I think it'll be just as good. O God, you have created the universe by your eternal word and have blessed humankind in making us stewards of the earth. We pray for your world that we may share and conserve its resources and live in reverence for creation and in harmony with one another. Amen.
All right, thank you, Aaron. It's very, very nice and simple and I think relevant to our conversations this week. So just to kind of recap, if any of you are in the room that were not here, missed a couple sessions earlier, Monday we kind of did a very broad global, regional, kind of national look at food systems, kind of the long trajectory of humanity's relationship with food in 8 minutes. And I only doubled that to about 16 minutes. But that just kind of kicked off the conversation. Then we have some amazing panels on Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday about local food production, and then Wednesday kind of the larger systems and incentives that farmers and hungry people face kind of socially. And then today we have 3 more great panelists, all local to the county, that are going to be sharing with us. And the theme kind of loosely is the future of food. And so we're kind of, we kind of looked at what we have already, the dynamics of what's going on. So what kind of, with a future orientation, can we as eaters contribute and assist to the system in a way that is beneficial to the earth, beneficial to farmers, beneficial to our communities and our bodies. And but as we look at that theme, just kind of like we saw Tuesday and Wednesday, we jump around as we start to make the connections in our brain. So I'm going to let these people within their domain of expertise kind of let these conversations flow as they do. So I'm going to let you all, if you don't mind, introduce yourselves. And we'll just kind of start with your name, your current role, how you got there, what drives you to do the work that you do, and then we'll, like previously, we'll go into kind of some prepared questions and then end with some question and answer. So please go ahead and start, Christine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is this on? Usually I don't need to use a mic because my voice is plenty loud, but I am Christine Stinson. I'm the administrator of the Marshall County Health Department. Our role here when it comes to food is making sure that the end product of that food is safe and wholesome to the end consumer. The State Department of Health more regulates the wholesale product. So what you see coming into your grocery store is regulated at the state level. So we're more regulating that end product from restaurant to consumer, from grocery store to consumer. How did I get to the position that I'm at? It's been a long journey, but very early in my life, I had the pleasure of meeting Robert Kennedy Jr. and listening to him talk about cleaning up the Hudson River. At that point in my life, I was in the nursing program, and I realized that I was not a nurse practitioner, but in fact, I was a public health practitioner. I ended that semester in the nursing program and went straight into public health, and I have not looked back or regretted one decision that I've made. I feel like public health is incredibly important to the community and to our society. And I think that what we do in public health makes a difference. I think that when we look at the world today and we look at places that are desirable to live in, our sanitary standards are one of the things that make our communities good to live in. And so I feel like public health does make a difference for the better of every community. And I also believe, as Robert Kennedy Jr. once said, nature is the infrastructure of all communities. So the better we protect that and the better we do at being good stewards to the earth, the better our communities are to live in.
It's really hard to follow. My name is Danielle Lafleur. I work for St. Joe Health System. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator for St. Joe County and Marshall County. I got here because I accepted a fellowship with the hospital after I graduated from Notre Dame in 2017. I stayed because I loved the work I was doing. So what brings me to the panel is because St. Joe every 3 years does a community health needs assessment in both counties. And what the needs assessment found was that the people of both St. Joe and Marshall County wanted better access to nutrition, wellness, just healthy resources in general. And so what I am missioned to do is kind of create these plans and strategies to give the people basically what they want. So we are creating programs to give people access to healthy foods for free, to give them access to exercise programs, and to make just general healthy and a healthy lifestyle easier. And yeah, that's about it for me.
That's good.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Klein, and I am an instructor at Culver Academies. I teach classes in ethics and sustainability there, and I also serve as a school sustainability director. And so I think where my role on this is, as we talk about the future, I've been working with students here for the last, high school kids for the last 5 years, and the ones who will be more directly impacted by the types of decisions and issues you all have been talking about for the last several days, more than any of us. I can share a little bit about what I see kids interested in, and these are kids from all over the world, some from very privileged backgrounds and some not from that situation, but all of whom are on this boat together. A little bit of a background. I thought when I came to Culver and as this position of sustainability director, I was really focused on energy use and buildings and maybe our lake and things like that. And very quickly, I mean, kids are interested in that stuff too, but from food resonates with them much more strongly, resonates with teenagers much more strongly than energy and some of these other topics. So and kids are concerned about where our food comes from, how nutritious it is, and so how we can encourage that and develop that ethic within our students is really where I'm driven. So I look forward to the discussion.
And Chris, I have your slides up as well. I don't know if you would wanted to comment on those now, or I can have them up available as we continue conversation.
Maybe if we want to, I don't think we need to start unless you want me to start with them. We only have a half hour. So.
Okay. So yeah, as we go through the conversation and you see something relevant there, I see we both use the same bread for the world slide. Yeah. So we've had that up. So one of the questions I'd ask you guys is one that's usually difficult for individuals, families, institutions to ask themselves is, what went wrong? What has failed? And especially relating to, and this is maybe almost teed up especially for health regulations, fire regulations, aviation regulations. People say, I have several friends in those industries, and they said that each one is written in blood. You know, there's a reason that all of those things exist based on previous experiences. So, what are some things in terms of food programs, food supply, and not saying it has to be as serious as that, but just social enterprises that fell flat or whatever else. How can we do better next time instead of making the same mistakes? Speak openly and honestly about things that did not work, so we can improve that moving forward.
Well, I've got kind of a simple one, not written in blood necessarily, but we had at lunch we were talking about community gardens, and again, it's teaching, from my perspective, teaching kids where food comes from, and how food grows, and how challenging it can be to grow food. So we had a community garden on our school for several years. The problem was it was essentially almost a car ride. It was a good 25-minute walk from where the kids were. And gardens need tending, right? So and the kids have a schedule, and so it was very difficult to just to maintain the garden. And also, as most schools are, the stuff grows in June and July when the kids aren't here. So it fell back on a handful of adults to tend the garden. But yet kids want to bring that onto our campus where it's closer, where they get more involved. I can show some pictures later. So we've just started some raised beds right next to the different dormitories on our campus, which will give kids, I mean, it'll be easier. I mean, we need to make a little, let's not get in our own way when it comes time to designing a system to teach how to work. So it was towards the end, Adam.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having.
That's all right. So that was one. We failed in where we started the program, and so we've learned from that and have brought it back onto campus in a little, maybe a smaller, not necessarily production sized way. So.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just have a quick thing. So piggybacking on the garden, St. Joe is building a garden, and then I found out today another organization is building a garden, which is great. But that brings to light that we need to communicate a little better. So a lot of us are in silos, and Marshall County does a great job at that. St. Joe County is a little worse, but if we came together, and had these conversations together as a community and said, hey, we're doing this here, we're doing this here, we could make these initiatives bigger and stronger, and then the community as a whole would know. And I think that is a problem because, I mean, we're all wanting to change our community and make our community better, and we're doing it in these small pieces when we could really come together and make a massive impact if we just knew what we were doing.
I liked what Adam said about we haven't reacted quick enough. When we look at society as a whole and where we've came from since even when we started regulating things, and I'll take that back to maybe the 60s, the 50s, when we really started looking at, hey, wait a minute, this isn't just hilly-nilly, let's do what we want. And we started putting in regulations for safe food handling, regulating what was going on in slaughterhouses, where the waste from those slaughterhouses went. And then you had to look at society as a whole. We stopped living on farms, and we started converging into a more urban living. But yet our diet as Americans have stayed the same. We're a meat and potatoes kind of a country. We like meat, we like it, and we want it cheap, and we want a lot of it, which is fine, but we don't have as many farmers that we used to have, and eating that kind of diet is not a real sustainable way to do things either. So that leads us into how do we change society's way of eating, and not seeing that you have to have a meat and a piece of bread at every meal, and that's how I was raised. But we raised our own chickens, we slaughtered our own rabbits, we took care of ourselves. But now most of us don't live on those farms, and we do need to take a little step back. Community gardening, I think, is a wonderful way to teach people how to grow their own food, and then how to harvest it, and then what do we do. So we have to go back to teaching how do we can food, so we can teach people how to be more sustainable and not just expect that you go to the grocery store and you get a can of crushed tomatoes. We need to teach people how to do that for yourself because it's healthier, and so we'll have a healthier society. You look at our obesity rates and our diabetic rates, how they have also went up as we've went to more processed ways of eating. I don't know how I got down this rabbit hole, but I had a point to that when we kind of talked about future of foods, and I don't think the future is to deregulate food safety, but it is looking at other food sources and changing the way that America eats their food. And I'm not saying that don't eat meat at all. I love meat, but we need to have a more diverse menu across across the whole, and that starts with teaching children. I love the crickets that they have out there, because crickets are, if you look at the world supply of what people eat, crickets are a sustainable food for some places. So we need to not go, oh, that's so nasty, and think outside the box of, what do we eat? I remember the first time that I told my sisters that I was going to bring hummus to the family cookout, and they were like, we don't eat that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll make something else. I brought hummus and I called it bean dip, and they loved it. So, it's getting out of our own way of being able to find different things to eat.
It's a great story about the chickpea spread. Yeah, you had something,
Well,
Chris.
I want to build on what Christine said about taking food sources, looking for new sources of food. And so in addition to crickets, we were talking earlier, and this was a kind of another failure that we had at our school, where we were overproducing food. We were cooking too much. We were throwing trays of lasagna and platters of noodles and meats in the trash because we were preparing too much. And so through the Food Council, Marshall County Food Council, and some efforts there, we were able to figure out a way of essentially mining that waste stream and packaging the food in these little containers and freezing it under the appropriate guidelines for donated and recovered food. And in 2018, we ended up, I think, about 6,500 meals we pulled out of that waste stream that would have otherwise was going to landfill. And that was also a kid-driven project.
Right. Yeah.
And it was, but it gets this idea of scale. And that's something that I think we need to think about as a community. A garden is a great thing and a wonderful thing. Does it scale enough to feed people that don't have it? And that's something that I think we need to acknowledge, right?
And I think that it was a great response when there was, and it was grassroots, it was driven by young people that said, look at all the food that's being thrown away. And it wasn't just here in Marshall County. I first knew about it in some places in Indianapolis. And they came to the health department, and when you look at our rule, it doesn't tell us what to do. But we agreed, there are safe foods that can be repurposed. So how do we come together and we still stay in our lane, which is to make sure that a safe and wholesome product is provided to that end person, but that we're not contributing to overuse of the landfill and hungry people are being fed. So win, win, win. It was a great thing. And now we see these repurposing programs all over the place. And I think that they're wonderful.
So I can speak for that as well. I'm an executive board member for Cultivate, and they are a food rescue organization that are coming into Marshall County now. They just went viral. It's really amazing. They were on CBS and NBC and Newsweek and Ellen, and just, it's amazing. But they are doing exactly that. So they were initiated in 2017, and they have already rescued over 200,000 pounds of food, which is insane. And you think when you see food being wasted, it kind of upsets you that, that there are people everywhere that are hungry. There are kids going to bed starving everywhere here. And you think, this could be fixed very easily. And there are these organizations out there doing that. But the tricky part of food rescue is not all of that food that you see in the cafeteria can go toward food rescue programs, and she can speak to that clearly. So the thing about food rescue is the food in the cafeteria right there that you see right now cannot go to a food rescue program. It has been, for lack of a better word, tainted. So it's, for what Cultivate does, it's cooked food that has not been touched by, the public. They take that food and then they repurpose it, and they put it into containers that are about 1.5 pounds. They freeze it, and then they go to local organizations. So they have a partnership with the neighborhood center here in Marshall County. And the neighborhood center says, we want 2,000, meals. And so they Cultivate will come down here, give them 2,000 meals, and then they feed, people in need. So the great thing about why I am a member of Cultivate is because the hospital is doing food rescue. It's one of our initiatives. So both campuses, St. Joe and Plymouth campuses, all of the food that can be rescued is being rescued, and it's being donated to Cultivate because we want to, one, feed the people in need, and two, reduce our food waste footprint. I mean, we don't want to contribute to all of the other numerous things that are happening to our environment. So it's kind of, a double whammy. We're helping our environment, but we're also helping our people. So I think it's a great cause.
I love the kind of stay in your lane. Or maybe another way of saying that is take advantage of all the strengths that are in your community, because when we started this recovery program, people started coming to us and say, well, my aunt is a shut-in, and can I take 5 meals for her? And somebody else would come. And very quickly we said, wait a minute. There are plenty of organizations in the community that are set up to distribute and to work with the needed population that needs food. Let's let them handle this. Let's let them, they have rules in place, they have a distribution mechanism. So we found those community partners and said, here's the inputs. You guys get it to the people that are, most in need. And that helped make it a little easier for our organization to continue the program.
Yeah.
So
Community partnering is one of the best things that any community can do, whether you're a large community like South Bend or you're a small community like Marshall County. The staying in our lanes is important. As long as we're all traveling the same way, we get to that place faster and safer. And I've got great partnerships. The health department partners with so many different organizations. And by those partnerships, we've been able to move the health department forward to offer more services to everybody in Marshall County. And I think that those partnerships are very, very important. And sometimes, as she said, we get siloed, and we just stay in that silo, and we think, I'm chugging along and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but when we partner, we all start moving forward.
So one thing you said, Christine, that kind of harkened back to a conversation we had Tuesday. Bob Yoder pointed out, our dairy system used to be everybody had a few head of milking cows, and we go pick up at Christine's, and we go to Danielle's, and the same truck will go down to Chris's, and then, well, the problem is if Chris is the only guy that has a sick cow or whatever else, you tainted the entire milk supply. And so as the dairy industry has continued to consolidate and these regulations are added, it creates and that's that's the tricky part of regulation. Hopefully you can speak to this, of creating things that really drive a safe food system without creating barriers to entry, because we also, we're also not naive to believe that in a kind of a capitalist society, we're not going to see these very large players come in and lobby for additional regulations to prevent some of these small and regional ones who really do have hygienic systems, but they can't afford the capital and they don't have the volume to compete, and so you see a consolidate, in the name of quote unquote food safety. I've seen this happen sometimes, that we really want to push for this big expensive solution that is kind of hard to tell whether that's actually a value add for the supply chain. And then, we talk about, well, we want local farmers, we want to support local farmers, we want, one on every square mile and whatever else, but how does that fit into a system where there are sometimes those barriers?
That's a really loaded question, and I feel ambushed. You would have to give me a specific of a regulation that was driven by industry that then was written in and passed by EPA or the FDA that was targeted not for safety but to drive out small businesses. I think everything, when you look at this, I agree when you said these regulations are written in blood. It's because why do they have to do something in here? It's because something bad happened. And they retro looked at that and wrote a regulation for it. So I would need to know more of what you're talking about, of regulations that drive out. Now, do regulations drive out small businesses? I think that is true too. But a lot of times what I see, and I'm not at the federal level, I'm at the lowest level that there is. So there's federal, state, and then local. So I'm bottom rung here. And when I see a restaurant that is struggling to meet 410, IAC 7-24, and they're saying, well, if you make us wear gloves, you're going to put us out of business. We can't afford gloves. Maybe you should be out of business. If you can't afford to provide a safe and wholesome product and wearing gloves, and I've had that said, when gloves came in, I've been around when we didn't wear gloves and had those restaurants saying, you're going to put us under. I think that if you're running that shoestring that you can't provide safe products, then maybe it is time that a bigger industry comes in that can meet those safety standards.
Well, it's not my intention to ambush you or blame all of the federal regulations that are imposed on you for
Blame
that.
the
But
Freds.
just to speak of those tensions that as we, as consumers, it's easy for us who are not farmers to say, well, we want every township to have a local farmer who's going to deliver it to my door and, do all this. And I want it to only be, 5 cents more than Kroger. And we've talked about that as well. Bob would say, farmers are going to grow anything for you as long as you're going to pay for it. And he mentioned that there are farmers within Marshall County, typically in Anabaptist or Mennonite communities, that are doing that on a smaller scale, but they have to drive down to Indianapolis to find a market to be able to feed their families, to support their business. So that gets back to the idea of having a marketplace for them that works.
Right. Americans want lots of food and they want it cheap. And factory farming meets that niche. Whether you like it or not, that's how we get massive amounts of food that we can throw away. It's through factory farming, not family farming. So if we as a society support family farms, and I do support family farms, but they still have to be able to provide a safe and wholesome product, which means that they have to have the equipment to be able to pasteurize the milk and to do all of that stuff. That costs money. And so for a normal small family farm, instead of your brick of cheese being $3.25 for this Kraft cheese that you get, that family farm is going to have to charge $8.25 for that same brick of cheese. So, but if you value family farms, then you're going to say, I'll pay $8.25 because this person should be able to have a livable life and produce family farm food. I'll pay more for it. I value that. But what we see typically are people say, I value family farming, but I'm going to take $3.25 for the cheese.
I might share a story on this. The first slide with the numbers on it, the 1071. So really kind of a transformational event I attended, and I would encourage anybody who has an interest in this issue to get out to Des Moines in October for some. Keep going back or the other way. There. Okay, 1071. So this was. Have you talked about this?
I've not.
Okay. So the World Food Prize is a gathering of some of the best and brightest minds on the planet, all dedicated to trying to address hunger in a sustainable, comprehensive way. And it was a brainchild eventually of a guy by the name of Norman Borlaug, who was the Green Revolution back in the late 60s and 70s. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for the work that he did in developing strains of drought-resistant wheat and rice, credited with saving the lives of 100 million people as a result of that. So at this conference, the land-grant universities, large agricultural firms, African country presidents diplomats all show up and try to address these issues, including high school kids, right? There's a high school competition across the country to address issues relating to this, 1071. So 10 stands for 10 billion. In our planet, this is approximate, our planet approximately every day produces enough food to feed 10 billion people. But there's about 7 billion, or a little more than 7 billion people that live on our planet, and 1 billion of them are hungry or food insecure. So this, in 3 simple numbers, illustrates the challenge that we're talking about, the lack of, where there's food waste and there's, food that expires once we get it into our refrigerator. All the things that contribute to this, I think, are summarized in these 3 numbers, and it gets to this idea of scale. 1 billion people is a lot of people, and we have a big garden, and I'm an advocate of community local farms, and that. I don't know if that's the answer or the complete answer, because of 1 billion people. We really need to scale it and talk about how we might do that. So, I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer.
I guess in responding to that too, it's something I go back and forth with the global and the local, because there is, at a macro level, the feed the world question. But none of us in here, as far as I know, are in charge of trade policy with Japan or anything else, or developing the next hybrid seed that's going to boost grain. So when I approach local food issues, I'm looking at the local, not just the food quantity and quality, but also the social infrastructure. So, and from an educational perspective, I had some students here from Bishop Knoll High School, and we were out tilting the solar panel. Said, how many have ever been in a pasture? And there's like 20 kids, and there's like one of them raised their hand. And the other person like, what's a pasture? So we're talking about, we are so urban now that we back to the very, very fundamentals of what food is and where it comes from. And so the fact that you have a garden outside your home or a community garden is not to feed the world, not necessarily even to give you a majority of your fresh fruits and vegetables, or even the canning, because you can get to the point where you go with canning. My wife and I have gone through this cycle of like, we're going to can, we're going to do this. And then you do the math and you're like, we didn't really save much money. We kind of were out of our throats one night when we had this problem, and I'm sick of eating tomatoes. But that wasn't the point. A little bit of that was a connection with the earth. So it gave us a reason to go outside and look at the tomatoes. It gave us a reason to spend time with each other, a certain amount of time, not too much time maybe. And to enjoy, late winter when we get to open up this delicious can of food and share a meal together, and to make those connections. Now, we did not put away all the tomatoes, and we never had that expectation, but it keeps us thinking and reminding about food systems, and when we go to buy a whole flat of tomatoes or whatever else, or go to the store, it keeps that in the forefront of our minds.
It's one of the things, I think that's a great story, and I think it has its absolutely place. But I think we also need to be open to some other ideas, and maybe not typically traditional ways of when we say a community garden. I took a group of kids to a Green Schools conference, and they had the exhibitors and such that you typically see at some of these conferences, and one of them had a kind of, I would call it a salad machine, and you may have seen it. It was about a refrigerator-sized device, a hydroponic lettuce growing machine. There was a growing medium, and you put the lettuce seed in the growing medium, and the water filtered down, and the maker said that it produces 25 pounds of lettuce a month. And no soil, it had a light fixture for its source of energy, and it looked not like any community garden I've ever seen. But you look at some countries, the Netherlands, for example, which are a huge food producer and doing it all in warehouses. And some of these solutions I think we have to be open to, again, because our population is growing. And there are urban areas where gardens are a thing. At the same conference, and this is be an awesome road trip from here. There's something called the Sweetwater Foundation in the south side of Chicago, where a guy has taken 4 city blocks of what you would be called urban blight or urban decay, whatever pejorative term you might want to use, and he's created a farm in a school that kids are doing, and they're growing food on this 4 city block area in a very, and it was so inspiring. So there, it's all in.
So, man, time flies. I wanted to give a little bit of time, and if we run out of questions, we can go back into some of the stuff we were talking about. For people to respond in the audience, listening to their various areas of expertise or questions that was stimulated. Did you guys have any questions for our panelists?
We were that thorough.
Yeah.
Well, what do people think the future of food is? How do we address the problem of both feeding our hungry people locally and the broader national? What resonates with you guys? What do you think?
I guess I really like when you started talking about partnerships. I think that is part of the larger solution, is making sure that we're working together towards those goals. Because if we keep going on the same track, separately or in those silos, that we're going to lose a lot of ground, and we don't have a lot of time to cover that. So I really appreciate you addressing that.
And I don't think that there's any one answer to what the future looks like. I think that if we can take anything from the past, is we should never put all of our eggs in one basket and rely on any one way to solve any problem. There has to be, different ways. So if what I see the future is very diverse. It's going to be a bunch of different ways that we're going to feed everybody. And hydroponics is one. Aquatic systems are another. And so there's just going to be a lot of new innovative ways that we're going to grow food, harvest foods, and transport the food.
I think I am definitely not the grower of this, so food in itself is not my expertise, but getting it to the community, I would say, is. And as the community expert, I think that, she's right. It's so complicated. I think for me, the biggest thing is the socioeconomics of everything. So for someone, a community garden is great. I think it's an amazing thing, but if it's not in your backyard, how are you going to get to it? So transportation is a huge problem. Knowing what a cucumber is a problem, and it's so stacked on everything. So I think, you brought it up earlier, education is huge, but it's everything. It's transportation, it's education, it's empowering people. So the great thing about what we're trying to do is we're not trying to say, hey, go eat a cucumber and go make a salad. We're saying, here are some options. Do what you want with it. So the people that come to these places feel like they have a choice. We're not just kind of pushing our agenda on them, that they think, that we know what's best for them. Because, if I tell you, oh, you need to eat more carrots, somebody, will be like, well, I don't like carrots, so I'm not going to listen to you.
Carrots, and I'm going to die.
Yeah, everyone is allergic to gluten now. I don't know, but so we're definitely trying to make it more encompassing, but it is such a loaded basket when you're talking about how you're going to solve poverty and food insecurity, and food deserts are everywhere. And Plymouth is a food desert. Yeah. So, you think, there's a Kroger, but, Kroger can be, expensive if you don't have a Kroger card. And
what about if you live in Argus and you don't have a car, it might as well be on the moon, Kroger. So we have food insecurities here.
Can I say one thing as a problem? So I just thought of it. So a program that I wanted to start that just flatlined was I wanted to give people access to like salad bars and things. And so we were going to go out and give people, like salad shakers, right? And they were going to go to I don't know, let's just say Kroger. Go to Kroger, and they were going to take their salad shakers and they were going to fill up their salad shakers at this salad bar, and it was going to be discounted. And then Kroger was going to know that this is going to be a discounted person, and then this was going to make people want to eat more salads, eat more healthy, and whatever. And when I approached the community about this, they were just like, well, what if I fill it up with chicken? And, what if I, just want chicken and ranch, or just, the pasta salads or something, is it open to what I want? And I was just like, oh my God, it just got 15 levels. Yeah. I thought you were just going to put mixed greens in there. And they were like, well, no. And so it kind of flatlined before it even started, because it was a lot deeper than I was initially thinking. So that program did not go anywhere. That was a failure on my part.
I disagree that it was a failure. I think anytime we try anything and we put those ideas out there, they may not go to where we want them, but I never put it in a failure column. I put it in a learning column. But we have to continue to try, and that's why I say it's going to be very, very diverse. Because is community gardening the answer? No. Is getting rid of factory farming the answer? No. Is going back to the 1860s where everyone lived on a farm the answer? No. But it's going to be a combination of a bunch of different things. Factory farming in 30 years is going to be looking very different than what factory farming looks like today, and that's good. Factory farming does need to have a transformation, but there's not one answer to any of this. And I think community gardening is a great thing for a multitude of different reasons, and we've talked about a lot of those, and we could talk about nutrition. We could have a whole nother day and a half talking about how our society changed from into processed foods, and what young people think is home cooking now is Hamburger Helper. That's not cooking from scratch, folks. And so that's interesting to me how we got there, and how we need to take that, and we can look what a generation of eating processed food has got us. If you look at that generation, and I include my kids in that generation. We went from having stay-at-home mothers into working parents. So now both parents work, to most households, or a lot of households, are single-parent households now that are working and trying to raise kids and trying to do this and trying to do that. And things that were cut were cooking, and we went to convenience cooking. And I went down another rabbit hole. I apologize. My goodness, I know. We need to have another topic about that, because it could get really interesting.
Well, as expected, I knew we would go down a lot of rabbit trails, and they were very interesting and productive. And being that you guys weren't here earlier, you didn't even know all the ways that it connected back to previous conversations. So let's give them a round of applause, and thank you for taking time out of your day to come share with us the things that you guys are doing. On that note about home cooking, we did get some herb starts ready for anybody who wants. I apologize, they're not, you wouldn't sell them for Kroger at $5, whatever, but they are germinated and growing. There's groups of herbs that you guys can take and grow out there, and there's little pieces of newspaper you can wrap them up in just to keep the dirt off the floor. And we have our daily drawing. And the winner gets one of those food-related books out there, as well as a couple cans of Ancilla beef. And we're going to have Sister Rosemary possibly draw for us. Susie Black. Is Susie here?